question. So we're talking about regenerative therapy. So you do stem cells, you do PRP, bone marrow, and then lipogems. Is that correct? And I don't know a ton about that. That's from the fat cells. But what have you found that works well? And for maybe repair, even a meniscus, we can use that as an example.
Yeah.
What have you found works well for that? And a big question is, for preventative measures, is there any indication to, like, say you just have kind of achy joints, you've been doing jiu-jitsu for a while or training for a while, is there an indication to say, hey, let's just set up an annual injection stem cells or whatever? Is there any benefit to that?
Not that it can be supported by science, but I'll tell you what can help. A maintenance program, a maintenance stretching program can help. Making sure your weight is ideal so that your body's not overloaded. I think a lot of problems happen due to overload or overstrain. So how do you decrease strain? Well, if you stretch, your tissues are more pliable. It's kind of like a rubber band. If a rubber band just sits there and you don't do anything, it's kind of rigid. But then if you kind of stretch it a little bit, it's a little bit more stretchable. So same thing with our tissues are viscoelastic, so they can act like rubber bands. So if you're never stretching, you're rigid and more likely to pop or to rip. So if you do a maintenance stretching program, which I think a lot of jiu-jitsu guys do, actually, they seem to be into stretching. But I think that if you get stretched and you stretch routinely, just like training, then I think you can decrease injuries. And most jiu-jitsu guys are their weight is fine, but as we get a little heavier, it does put more weight on your joint. So if you manage that, then you can avoid injury as well.
Interesting. Yeah. And as far as like you said no really research as far as like, getting any kind of injections that just kind of for preventative measures that you've seen.
None that I'm aware of as far as prophylactic regenerative injections. No, but in terms of what can be done, whole body, make sure you're, as we get a little older, our hormones change. For guys, sometimes our testosterone goes down a little bit. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to prevent injuries, but as far as general health and vitality, that's preventative, being able to optimize your endocrine system. But as far as injecting something, nothing that I'm aware of at this moment. I mean, there are people that take growth, like to feel better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not sure if, how much that's really helping people, but for, as far as routinely, maybe not the best.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that as far as injectables, things we can inject to decrease injuries, I can't really think of any right now off the top of my head, but I think like the best thing in terms of preventative is lifestyle, stretching, core strengthening, having a strong back, lats, traps, butt. Those things are all very important. So if you're going to spend a little time, instead of putting a needle in you with a little deca, then just stretch. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so here's a question for you, because obviously, it's become super popular, and I'm sure you have some interesting insights in it. Stem cells seem to be this, some people say it's amazing and you see people doing it. What kind of sort of results, or maybe lack of results, or your thoughts, what have you seen with stem cells being used with people?
Well, it depends what you mean by stem cells. Okay. So there are people that are going to other countries, whether it's Moon or Panama or wherever, and they're getting intravenous stem cells that have been harvested and have been expanded, meaning grown and multiplied. We don't grow and multiply stem cells in this country. So those are stem cells from your own body. They do blood draws, and then they're able to grow them, and then they get them injected. And we've all heard of people doing that. I mean, some pros have talked about it on podcasts and things like that. And oftentimes people are doing that kind of like for vitality, feeling better, or maybe they suffered an injury here. They go to Panama or Cancun, and they get a bolus of millions of stem cells of their own. So maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. I'm not really sure, but people do say, as far as empirical information, they feel better. Now, as far as in this country, we get stem cells from our fat, or we get stem cells from our bone marrow, and I think bone marrow has the most research. And it's been used mostly for to augment healing, maybe after a surgery, or to augment healing of a tear that might heal, like maybe a small rotator cuff tear. Or we use it to decrease pain from a degenerative problem, like an arthritic knee. I think bone marrow aspiration concentrate, BMAC. BMAC is what we do when we take the bone marrow out of from the pelvis. Concentrate the stem cells along with the proteins and the platelets, and we inject them. So BMAC is probably most often used right now. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going through defining stem cells, because there's more. There's actually more. So BMAC is probably the most legitimate and most proven, scientifically proven stem cells that will help. Lipogems is just a technique. Lipogems is a technique for harvesting stem cells from your fat. So when you harvest stem cells from your fat, the FDA changed the rules a couple of years ago that in order to procure those stem cells, you cannot use any substance to modify the fat cells. So we can't manipulate. So now we've changed the way we harvest stem cells from fat. We can only fragment them, basically kind of tear up the fat basically into tiny little pieces, and then the stem cells are inside of it. So, or they're not. I don't think I can legally say stem cells, to be quite honest. I think we have to call them signaling cells. Mesenchymal signaling cells. You can't say certain things the FDA does not allow us to say. Okay?
Yeah.
So now I'll tell you what happens. What's been happening in the last few years here. You're gonna hear people that say, "Hey, I went down the street and I went to this clinic and they gave me stem cells." And then you ask them, "Well, where'd they get them from? Like bone marrow or your fat?" No. It came in a vial. It came in a vial. Well, what was happening, or what has happened, and it's falling out of favor, is companies are able to harvest cells from umbilical cords, umbilical blood, umbilical tissue, amniotic fluid, amniotic tissue, Morton's jelly. These are all birth products. It's kind of like hot dogs. When you go to a butcher, they throw away the parts that aren't the lean meat. They put it into a bucket, and then they can make hot dogs, ground beef out of it. Well, birth tissue is like that. It's like, what are we gonna do with that stuff? Hey, let's grind it up. Let's morselize it. It's got to have something in it, and it does. It actually does have proteins, and it does have cells. But it comes down to processing. The way they process it, freeze it, freeze dry it, and then of course, how do you thaw it? Because maybe there were stem cells, but then when you thaw it, they died. I mean, it's not like when you save your kids' umbilical blood in these banks. Those places that's a whole different level of what they do. They're able to put nutrients in there and they have protocols to thaw it, and and they're able to then get a lot of stem cells when they unthaw. But not what we're talking about. These folks are selling little vials with frozen stuff, and the doctor basically just shakes it, puts it in their hand, thaws it, and sticks it into the joint. So what's been done is research has been showing in laboratories that when they look at these tissues, these birth tissues, most cells are dead. Most of the cells are dead. They're dead. They're just the quality of the cells is worse than a PRP injection. So so people get been spending a lot of money on stem cells, which nowadays, because of the FDA, everything's changed, and the folks that do sell these injectables, which by the way probably have some properties that are helpful. There are proteins in it. They have hyaluronate, which is a protein that can help, but they're not stem cells that are live. So even the salespeople have had to change their song a little bit. Well, not a little bit. They can't say stem cells anymore. Isn't that amazing? They can't use the word stem cells anymore. So that just goes to show that there was a problem to begin with, and it's been highlighted, which I think is good, because I think the consumer needs to know. Now, are those products not useful? No, they're useful for certain things, but not as good as your own tissue. So that's why I asked you, what are we talking about when people say stem cells? Because when you ask your buddies or your friends who have had it, did they go to Panama to get expanded stem cells? Did they get their own stem cells, which are real from their own bone or fat, preferably bone? Or did they get it from a vial? Because if they got it from a vial, then they probably didn't get live cells.